The White House press secretary stepped up to the podium on February 5th, 2026, with a statistic so stunning it should have stopped the entire country cold. Caroline Leavitt announced that murders across America's largest cities had plummeted to their lowest level since 1900.
A study from the Council on Criminal Justice shows that the murder rate across America's largest cities plummeted in 2025 to its lowest level since at least 1900.
Marking the largest single year drop in murders in recorded history. The Council on Criminal Justice study she cited showed homicides fell 21% from 2024 to 2025 in 35 cities that reported data, representing 922 fewer killings. This wasn't just good news. This was historic. If the numbers hold when the FBI releases final data later this year, the national murder rate could fall to approximately 4.0 per 100,000 residents, a level not seen in over a century of modern crime tracking. But here's where it gets strange. Levitt didn't just present the numbers. She claimed ownership of them. She told reporters that this dramatic decline is what happens when a president secures the border, fully mobilizes federal law enforcement to arrest violent criminals, and aggressively deports the worst of the worst illegal aliens from our country. She rattled off administration crime stats like a victory lap scorecard. According to Levitt, the FBI made twice as many violent crime arrests in 2025 as it did in 2024, the last full year of former President Joe Biden's presidency. Through the first full year of Trump's presidency, there were nearly 3 times as many total FBI arrests than there were from January 20th, 2024 to January 20th, 2025. The FBI disrupted 1,800 gangs and criminal enterprises, a 210% increase from the year prior. The FBI arrested 1,700 child predators and more than 300 human traffickers. Since President Trump took office, 6 of the FBI's top 10 most wanted fugitives have been captured. Washington, D.C. homicides were down 62% in 2025. In Memphis, Tennessee, where Trump deployed federal agents and National Guard troops, nearly 5,600 arrests were made. Aggravated assaults down 53%. Sexual assaults down 53%. Robberies down 70%. And then Levitt dropped something even more current. In Washington, D.C., crime in 2026 to date is down substantially across virtually all categories compared to the same period in 2025. As of February 5th, there were 3 murders in the nation's capital throughout the year, down 83% from 18 murders between January 1st and February 5th in 2025. Sex abuse crimes down 63%, robberies down 58%, burglaries down 44%, motor vehicle theft down 58%, and arson down 100%. The narrative was clear and confident. Trump's crackdown made this happen. His policies delivered safety. His enforcement restored order. Fox News, Breitbart, The Daily Wire, Newsmax all carried Levitt's claims prominently, repeating her assertion that the numbers prove Trump's tough on crime agenda works. If this story stopped there, it would be simple. Historic crime drop. President claims credit. Numbers back him up. Done. But that's not where this story stops. Because when you zoom out just slightly, when you check what the actual researchers who compiled the data are saying, when you look at what was happening before Trump's second term even began, the picture fractures. I'm Claire Morgan, and this is the Mirror Moment podcast. Axios reviewed the same Council on Criminal Justice data and reported something the White House didn't mention. Violent crime was already falling to a 2-decade low in Biden's final year, calling into question whether Trump's policies have made an impact. Wait, already falling? Before Trump's second term? CBS News interviewed Ernesto Lopez, the lead author of the Council on Criminal Justice report, who noted that homicide rates had been steadily dropping since the late 2000s, prior to a notable spike in 2020. NPR reported that crime rates have been declining since 2021, according to data from both the Real-Time Crime Index and FBI. The Washington Post stated that Democratic leaders and some criminologists maintain that the decreases, which began under former President Joe Biden, are linked to the Biden administration's aggressive pandemic-era spending on communities. So which is it? Did Trump's tough on crime crackdown cause the murder rate to plummet to historic lows? Or was this decline already happening before he took office, driven by factors that have nothing to do with his second-term policies? If you just hit subscribe right now, you'll never miss another episode where we unpack exactly these kinds of framing wars. Because depending on which news outlet you trust, you're living in a completely different reality about what just happened in America. Let's lock in the confirmed facts before we go any further. The Council on Criminal Justice released a year-end 2025 crime trends report in late January 2026. The findings were dramatic. Homicide declined by 21% from 2024 to 2025. 31 of the 35 cities saw declines. Denver, Washington, D.C., and Omaha, Nebraska each posted drops of around 40%. Richmond, Virginia saw a drop of 59%, Los Angeles 39%, New York City 10%. Other crimes also fell sharply. Robbery declined 23%. Carjackings dropped 43%. Aggravated assaults fell 9%. Motor vehicle theft decreased 27%. The report stated that there is a strong likelihood that once nationwide data are reported by the FBI later this year, the 2025 homicide rate will fall to roughly 4.0 per 100,000 residents, the lowest rate ever recorded in law enforcement or public health data. After a historic 31% increase in homicides in 2020, the largest single-year jump since 1900, we are now experiencing a historic decline. Those are the numbers. They are real. They represent hundreds of lives saved, safer communities, families that didn't lose loved ones to violence. But here's what the report also said, and this is critical. The Council on Criminal Justice cautioned that its findings are based on a limited group of cities and preliminary police data that could change, and said the report documents crime trends, rather than proving that any single policy caused the declines. Read that again. The report documents crime trends rather than proving that any single policy caused the declines. The researchers who compiled the data explicitly said they cannot attribute this drop to one specific cause. The Council on Criminal Justice convened leading experts to answer what are the primary factors driving the recent decline in homicides. The experts pointed to a range of possible influences, including changes in criminal justice policies and programs, shifts in technology, and broader social, economic, and cultural trends. Adam Gelb said that there was a wide array of stresses, economic, financial, psychological, that the pandemic produced, and there were greater opportunities to settle scores with rivals precisely because there were fewer people on the streets and fewer cops on the streets. As we exited those circumstances as a society, it makes sense that murders and other crimes would fall as a result. John Roman, a senior fellow at NORC, said he sees the primary driver as the result of a variety of federal responses to the pandemic. The decline has been broad-based, with almost all large cities, suburban and rural areas experiencing significant drops. So the confirmed facts are this. Murders dropped to historic lows in 2025. The decline was widespread and dramatic. Experts believe multiple factors contributed, including post-pandemic recovery, increased government spending on communities, evidence-based policing strategies, and the restoration of normal routines. The data shows a trend, not who caused it, and that's where the framing war begins. Here's how the right framed the story. Fox News, led with White House, says murder rate plummeted to lowest level since 1900 under the Trump administration. Breitbart headlined White House touts study showing lowest murder rate in major cities in 126 years. The framing was immediate and direct. This happened under Trump. This is Trump's success. The coverage emphasized Levitt's assertion.
This dramatic decline is what happens when a president secures the border, fully mobilizes federal law enforcement to arrest violent criminals, and aggressively deports the worst of the worst illegal aliens from our country.
The Daily Wire emphasized that Levitt said the administration intends to continue expanding federal law enforcement operations in high-crime areas. This is what tough, unapologetic law enforcement looks like, and it's saving lives. The narrative structure was clear. Problem: Democrat-run cities plagued by crime. Solution: Trump's tough enforcement. Result: historic crime drop. The coverage included detailed statistics on FBI arrests, gang disruptions, child predator arrests, and reductions in specific cities. Breitbart even added 2026 data, noting that Washington, D.C. had only 3 murders year to date, down 83%. What the coverage largely omitted was any mention that crime had already been declining for years before Trump's second term. If you're someone who trusts these outlets, the story makes perfect sense. Trump promised law and order. Trump deployed federal resources. Crime dropped. Causation seems obvious. Now let's look at how the center and left framed the exact same data. Axios headlined U.S. murder rate hits lowest level since 1900, report says. Notice the difference. No attribution to Trump in the headline. But then Axios added critical context. Trump touts himself as a law and order president who has tackled crime by sending National Guard troops into predominantly Democrat-run cities and justified his immigration crackdown by linking undocumented immigrants to rising crime. But violent crime was already falling to a two-decade low in Biden's final year, calling into question whether Trump's policies have made an impact. CBS News focused heavily on expert interviews. They quoted Ernesto Lopez explaining that homicide rates had been steadily dropping since the late 2000s prior to a spike in 2020. They quoted criminology experts from Georgia State University, the University of Miami, and the Brennan Center for Justice, all pointing to evidence-based prevention strategies, pandemic recovery, and community investment as likely drivers. NPR noted that some researchers pointed to a disconnect between the widespread decrease in crime and President Trump's depictions of crime this year, particularly in Democrat-led cities. Trump called Chicago the most dangerous city in the world and said Washington, D.C. had been overtaken by violent gangs. But both cities have seen crime falling in recent years, like much of the rest of the country. The Washington Post noted that the drop comes at a delicate time in the nation's political debate as President Trump continues to cite crime as justification for deploying the National Guard. Democratic leaders and some criminologists maintain that the decreases, which began under former President Joe Biden, are linked to the Biden administration's aggressive pandemic-era spending on communities. MSNBC ran an opinion piece headlined, "The crime rate is falling in spite of Trump, and because of Democratic mayors like me." The piece argued that it is egregiously misleading and brazenly hypocritical of the White House to try to take credit. The truth is that it's all happening in spite of Donald Trump, not because of him. If you consume news from these outlets, the framing is completely different. The story isn't Trump saves America with tough enforcement. The story is crime was already dropping under Biden. Experts say pandemic recovery and community investment are the real drivers, and Trump is now trying to claim credit for something he didn't cause. Same numbers, opposite policy conclusions. And if you're wondering why this matters, think about what happens next. If you believe Trump's enforcement caused the crime drop, you'll support more federal deployments, more immigration crackdowns, more aggressive policing. If you believe the decline was already happening due to pandemic recovery and community programs, you'll worry that Trump's policies might actually harm the progress. Let me drop something that might make you want to hit that comment button and tell me I'm wrong. Both sides are cherry-picking the timeline to fit their narrative. The White House is taking credit for a trend that clearly predates Trump's second term. Axios reported in December 2025 that crime rates have been declining since 2021, according to data from both the Real-Time Crime Index and the FBI. CNN fact-checked Trump in April 2024 when he falsely claimed U.S. crime stats are only going up. Anna Harvey, a political science professor at New York University, told CNN that during 2020, the last year of the Trump presidency, violent crime rose dramatically. The murder rate increased by almost 30%, the largest one-year increase on record. But violent crime has been falling during the Biden presidency. So if we're being honest about the timeline, murders spiked dramatically in 2020 under Trump's first term. They began declining in 2021 under Biden. The decline continued in 2022, 2023, and 2024, all under Biden. Then Trump took office in January 2025, and the decline continued through 2025. The Vera Institute published an analysis titled, "Crime is Down in 2025." Trump doesn't deserve credit. They pointed to a critical factor the White House didn't mention. One explanation is greater government investment in community infrastructure, from jobs to streets to treatment programs. This included unprecedented investment in comprehensive safety strategies like community violence intervention and alternative crisis response, thanks to the 2021 American Rescue Plan Act and the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. Boston, a pioneer in community violence intervention, ended 2024 with its lowest murder count since the 1950s. But here's where the left-leaning framing also gets tricky. If Biden-era policies and post-pandemic recovery caused the decline, why did murders spike so dramatically in 2020 and 2021 in the first place? Experts point to pandemic disruption, economic stress, fewer people on streets, fewer cops on patrol, courts shutting down, and routine disruption. But that means the spike wasn't primarily caused by Trump-era policies either. It was caused by a global pandemic. And if the decline is due to post-pandemic recovery and restoration of normal government functions, that means the trend would likely have continued regardless of who was president, as long as those functions were restored. Jeff Asher, co-founder of Datalytics, told NPR that we're seeing really not just declines, but large and broad-based declines. I mean, it's everywhere. Generally, crime goes up and down by only a few percentage points each year. You think about a really large ship. It doesn't turn fast. These things don't change fast, and yet they have. And here's the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. Researchers weren't optimistic the decline in crime would continue into the new year. Some said with rates falling so much in 2025, they wouldn't be surprised to see them rise in 2026. Government funding cuts worry experts. In April, the Justice Department cut grants to hundreds of organizations focused on community safety, including school violence prevention programs, community violence intervention, and training for rural police officers. Many organizations have already had to shrink their services or lay off employees. Tanya Meisenholder told NPR that the federal intervention in U.S. cities, particularly the administration's clampdown on immigration, is harming trust between local police leaders and communities. For many folks in the public, they don't distinguish between types of law enforcement agents. That mistrust can make people less likely to call 911 when they need help and less likely to help police and prosecutors as witnesses. So if crime rises in 2026, who gets blamed? Will the right blame Biden-era policies finally failing? Will the left blame Trump's funding cuts and heavy-handed enforcement eroding community trust? If crime rises because community trust erodes, will that be seen as proof Trump's approach failed? Or will it be framed as Democrats undermining law enforcement? This is the mirror moment. Two audiences looking at the same historic crime drop and seeing completely different causes, completely different heroes, and completely different futures. One side sees Trump's enforcement saving cities. The other side sees Biden's investments finally paying off and Trump trying to hijack credit. The data supports elements of both narratives and definitively proves neither. The researchers who compiled the numbers explicitly say causation cannot be determined from this data alone. Yet both sides speak with absolute certainty about what caused this. That's not analysis. That's tribal storytelling. And the stakes are enormous because the policy decisions that flow from these narratives will shape whether this progress continues or reverses. Let's talk about what we actually know versus what we're guessing. We know murders dropped 21% in 2025. We know this is the largest single-year drop on record. We know the decline was widespread across cities of all sizes and political leanings. We know the trend started in 2021 and continued through 2025, spanning both administrations. We know experts point to multiple contributing factors, including pandemic recovery, community investment, evidence-based policing, and restoration of normal routines. What we don't know is which specific policies or factors were most responsible. We don't know if Trump's enforcement accelerated the decline or simply continued a trend that was already happening. We don't know if Biden's community spending was the primary driver or one of many factors. We don't know whether the decline would have happened, regardless of who was president, as a natural consequence of post-pandemic recovery. We don't know if the decline will continue in 2026 or reverse. These are unknowns. They are legitimate areas of debate. They require humility and nuance. But that's not what either side is offering. Here's what makes this particularly dangerous. Axios reported in November 2025 that homicides kept plunging in Trump's so-called hellhole cities. Buffalo, Denver, Orlando, and Seattle all had more than 40% declines in homicides. Portland, a city Trump frequently criticized as like living in hell, reported a 39% decrease in homicides. Chicago led the nation with a 22.1% drop in overall violent crime. So Trump deployed National Guard troops to cities he said were hellholes plagued by crime. But the data shows those cities were already experiencing dramatic crime declines before the troops arrived. Did Trump's deployments help sustain those declines? Did they do nothing? Did they risk harming progress by eroding community trust? The data doesn't tell us. But the framing wars mean we can't even have an honest conversation about what's working because everyone is too busy claiming credit or assigning blame. Let me be very clear about something. This is not a both sides are equally wrong argument. The facts matter. The timeline matters. The expert consensus matters. And on those points, the center and left-leaning coverage is closer to the expert consensus than the White House framing. The decline clearly predates Trump's second term. The experts clearly state causation cannot be determined from this data. The Council on Criminal Justice report clearly emphasizes multiple factors over years, not one administration's policies in 1 year. But that doesn't mean the left's framing is perfect either. Claiming Biden's policies definitively caused the decline is also overreach. The most honest answer is the least politically satisfying. This is a multi-year trend driven by multiple factors, and we need more research to understand causation. But here's why that answer doesn't work in our current media environment. Nuance doesn't go viral. Uncertainty doesn't win elections. Admitting we don't know doesn't fill a 20-minute cable news segment. So both sides pick the data points that support their narrative, downplay the caveats, and present certainty where none exists. Alex Picaro, a criminology professor at the University of Miami, told the Washington Post that the declining crime rates are an everywhere and all crime phenomena that suggest the trajectory will be sustained into future years. That's encouraging. But it also undermines the idea that any one president or policy caused this, if it's everywhere. And all crime, that suggests structural factors, not specific political interventions. So where does that leave us? Murders are at historic lows. That's real. That's worth celebrating. That's hundreds of families who didn't lose loved ones to violence. Communities are safer. That matters more than any political narrative, but the fight over who gets credit matters too, because it determines what policies we pursue next. If we believe Trump's enforcement caused this, we'll do more federal deployments, more immigration crackdowns, more heavy-handed policing. If we believe Biden's community investment caused this, we'll protect those programs, resist cuts, and push for more evidence-based interventions. If we believe it's primarily pandemic recovery, we'll focus on maintaining stability and avoiding disruption. These aren't abstract debates. They're decisions that will shape whether this progress continues. The most unsettling part of this story isn't that politicians are spinning the data. That's expected. The most unsettling part is that major news outlets are presenting one version of causation with confidence when the actual researchers say causation cannot be determined. The Council on Criminal Justice report is clear. The report documents crime trends rather than proving that any single policy caused the declines. That sentence should be the headline. Instead, we get Trump's crackdown made it happen on the right and crime falling despite Trump on the left. Both are speculation presented as fact. And here's the final uncomfortable question. If crime does rise in 2026, which narrative collapses? If Trump's enforcement was truly the cause, the trend should continue or accelerate under his policies. If it reverses, does that prove his approach failed? Or will the right blame Democratic resistance, court rulings blocking enforcement, or other factors? If Biden's community programs were truly the cause, the cuts Trump made should correlate with rising crime. If crime stays low despite those cuts, does that prove those programs weren't as critical as claimed? Or will the left argue there's a lag effect? The honest answer is that crime trends are influenced by so many variables: economic conditions, drug markets, gang dynamics, policing strategies, court backlogs, community programs, demographic shifts, cultural changes, that attributing causation to any single factor is nearly impossible without rigorous research over many years. But we don't have many years. We have election cycles. We have quarterly briefings. We have daily news cycles demanding explanations. So we get narratives instead of nuance. We get certainty instead of humility. We get tribal storytelling instead of truth-seeking. This episode isn't about telling you who to believe. It's about showing you that the framing war is happening whether you see it or not. The same data, the same historic crime drop, two completely different stories about what caused it and what should happen next. And depending on which outlets you trust, you're living in one of those stories right now, convinced the other side is lying or delusional, when the reality is both sides are emphasizing different parts of a complex truth that nobody fully understands yet. If this breakdown helped you see the framing gaps, do me a favor and share this episode with someone who gets their news from different sources than you do. Not to prove them wrong, but to show them how the same facts can live in two different realities. Because until we acknowledge the mirror moment, until we see that we're all looking at the same data through different frames, we can't have honest conversations about what's actually working and what isn't. And those conversations matter because lives depend on getting this right. The murder rate hit a 125-year low. That's a fact. What caused it? That's still an open question. And anyone claiming they know for certain is selling you something. Stay skeptical, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm Claire Morgan, and this has been the Mirror Moment Podcast.